Hello and a very warm welcome, dear listeners, to another episode of Value Impulses. And today we have a very, very nice episode that we're able to record together. There are three of us, in fact, and I'm particularly pleased to have Axel Juhnke and Sebastian Krüger here, who are my guests. I'll say a few words in a moment about where they work, but first of all, Axel, we've known each other for quite a number of years now. You're also certified with us and use our tools diligently. Profiling values. I think we met back then through the Grundle Leadership Institute. Is that right?
Right, exactly.
With whom we also work together intensively. And Sebastian, we also had the pleasure of meeting last year. And that's how the idea came about. So, a warm welcome, Sebastian. A warm welcome, Axel. Why don't you say hello?
Hello, Uli. Thank you very much. We're happy to be here.
Hello, Uli. Thank you as well from my side. I'm happy to be here today.
Wonderful. Then let's get started right away. Not much of a preamble, but I'll say a few words about Stratygy. That's your management consultancy, with two Ys, mind you. So the E is replaced by the Y. And at the end, of course, there's the other Y. What is your mission? I think it's very nicely expressed like this. Your success is our mission. So you approach the customer directly. With your mission, strategy, organization, and marketing from a single source. And one hook you have is, do you have something against sales fluctuations or employee turnover? Yes, yes. With the right ones to help accordingly. So you really go into the values. Into the corporate strategy with values. You want to integrate them, and you also have a wonderful slogan here that I've included. Especially in these times, I find it very relevant. It's called, Save Yourself the Crisis. And Stratygy, so with that, Axel and Sebastian are on board. And our hook right away, we've prepared a few topics, of course. The big challenge once again is that you can talk about everything, but not in 30 minutes. We'll manage it, and the start is the organizational chart, about which Sebastian said a few wonderful words earlier, and I've saved it for now. The organizational chart is really, well, how should I put it, very outdated. It's over 100 years old and it's still being used, and it's completely misleading. And with this organizational chart concept, which I'm now tossing over to Sebastian, you can quickly explain what you do. And then we'll go straight into the individual topics. Please, Sebastian.
Yes, thanks a lot, Uli. I think everyone can picture a classic organizational chart in their mind's eye. There's someone at the top, and at the very bottom, there are lots of people. That might basically still be correct as far as the disciplinary order in companies is concerned, which also has to be represented in some form. We're finding in companies that a strategy being developed isn't always truly reflected by the org chart alone. And that's where the first bit of trouble starts. But the second problem is something else entirely. If we imagine that within this org chart, the truth were written as it actually plays out in the real world, then suddenly you'd have many, many arrows and relationship links showing that one person plays golf with another. That's his ex-wife. Those two are having an affair. He hated him. He's still building a lamp for him. They know each other from a previous company. He once got a bad review from the boss, and so on and so forth. And now you compare that against the idea of how things are actually supposed to be organized in the company. And you see, oh boy, there are a whole lot of conflicts in that place. And we have a theory that says every negative number is subject to a conflict. And negative numbers are the ones that ensure a company is doing poorly. And we want to get at those negative numbers. And that's the holistic approach, Uli, where we say it's nice that we can advise on and develop strategies. We believe we're really good at that. But we know that thinking it isn't doing it. And since you have to communicate internally and externally, marketing is part of that, inside and out. Keywords like employer branding and what we know from the customer. And now your expertise comes into play, profiling value. What's that all about? It's about the individual, it's about teams, it's about values. And if you imagine, Uli, that this organizational chart, in the real world, actually goes through a thoughtful process, one where we carefully and collaboratively create meaningful values, which we then intentionally transform into a vibrant and living culture within companies and in the minds of the people who work there, almost playfully, with a sense of curiosity, then many of those negative numbers simply disappear. And that's a part that you simply need for success. I hope that this.
Yes. No, that's wonderful because that's what's often forgotten. And where people, the analysts, they look at all sorts of things, the numbers, the supposedly only assets, the products, whatever else. But the intangibles that really make the difference, those are the values of the people and the people themselves. And in that sense, it's a very important approach, and you also emphasize this holistic approach. Now, the first question here, Axel, for you as well. How exactly do you integrate values such as sustainability or social responsibility into your strategy development processes? I'm playing the role of, well, a naive customer, maybe a prospect, or perhaps even the listener. How do you do that? How do you integrate that?
Well, what we do there, dear Uli, is we want to look at it holistically and see these points as an integral part of strategic planning, right? We want to bring together and interlock people, communication, and everything that exists within the company. And this perspective is exactly what Sebastian just teased in the organizational chart. Behind every red number, there's a conflict, and behind those are conflicts in the value system. And that's how we look at it. Using marketing, communication, and considering the companies themselves from a variety of different aspects, from policy to management to leadership. Across all the points we see there. The structure, the culture, and the topics we need to work on together as a team. These are all important. We make sure to address each of these elements thoughtfully and collectively. We interlock those elements together, and we simply always make sure to include the human element, because that's really where we have to deal with the conflicts, with the issues that come up, with the numbers, and that's exactly where we want to move forward. So, it's important to always keep that in mind.
So you're somewhat the opposite of cold analytics. Instead, you're the warmth of real life, but things can often get windy, stormy, and even intense when it comes to those conflicts. I find it interesting that you say that behind every red number, something like that must exist. I think that's great. If we dive in a bit, what specific benefits do you see for companies that align their strategic decisions with values like transparency or sustainability? In the sense of, well, I'm a prospect now and I'm asking you, hey, specifically, what's in it for me as an entrepreneur? Maybe, Sebastian, that's a question for you.
Well, one thing is what I commit myself to. For instance, I'll take the SDGs from the World Organization, from the UN. Pick out 5, 6, 2, or however many, and say, that's what I'm committing myself to. Then I might also have my own values regarding sustainability or social issues. I'm speaking from the perspective of family businesses. Where investments are viewed long-term, where it's important that succession is settled, they always think with a broader horizon than just the current investment or a return on investment. Well, and the question is, how do you get there? Honestly, Uli, how do you get there? By doing both, actually. In your profiling values, you have heart, hand, and mind, or brain, as you call it. You really have to get to that. On the one hand, the factual and technical side, yes, we've been able to do that since we incorporated your profiling values concept. Axel got me excited about it. I did it myself a few years ago and gained some insights from it. I was just completely amazed. I did that together with our partner, Christoph Mahler. I don't know if you've met him yet.
Not yet. No,
And some things happened there. Axel had asked beforehand, hey, can we do this together? Then you'll get to know each other too. And we said, yeah, sure, let's do it. And then he presented the results to us, and I'll move away from the scientific side now. Then I'm in a warm dialogue, right?
Oh no.
And suddenly we were in different spheres. It was said, here Sebastian, finances, and so on. Well, okay, you're quite a bit above average there, but Christoph is much better. I'm thinking, aha, that's something. Then we were somehow into the structure, and then it was said, yes, Christoph is way ahead. For you, it's just okay. And then I think, okay, I've almost had enough. That's exactly what he doesn't do. And then Axel joined in and said, wait a minute, you have to see the inverted L here. And this and that. And he says, it's no wonder your structure is less pronounced, because you don't accept it anywhere. And then I say, what? Well, you're a lateral thinker. You walk in and the first thing you see is how you do it differently. Nobody's happy about that. Christoph looks at it first and wants to see exactly, how do you do it? And that's where we complement each other again.
Right.
And at that moment, through profiling values, well, 30 years of my life came to mind that I always thought. That for exactly this art that I master, when I go into companies and see things very, very quickly, for whatever reason. What could be done differently, because I bring mosaic pieces with me, Uli, from other companies, right?
Sure.
I've been able to get to know 224 companies in my life now. I'm not a bit smarter or more intelligent than others, but I bring a little suitcase of experience, mosaic pieces. And can tell you, why are half of these 224 companies successful and the others not? Which patterns repeat themselves? And I always thought they'd be grateful for the changes I bring in. But they never were, because I always met with resistance. And then Axel gives me the answer after what feels like 500 years. Well, because you're a lateral thinker. The word didn't have that connotation back then, right? Back then you could still use it like that. Or that's where it came from. And that was the first time I could see that it's a value I have within me, but one I have to learn to handle. But it first had to become transparent. And this transparency of values that individuals have and that we want to share together in a corporate value system, I have to get to that somehow. And that's how our third gear was born, Uli, because through profiling values it was possible to actually look at the individual, but then also teams and the entire workforce. And that's the holistic part. So, I can tell you, if you ask the specific question, how do you do it? We do company analyses, we plow through all the numbers, data, and facts. We conduct interviews with the employees, with the key employees. And then we strongly recommend doing profiling values, so we don't just form our own individual opinions, even if they're based on experience, but to include the science as well. And from both, in turn, a world is created that neither can achieve alone. And that's a huge added value, because we simply notice that from these interviews, the truth about many, many other things in the company comes to light.
Yeah, you get a very unique perspective there. That nobody else in the company has, right? I've been able to experience that in many projects as well, and that's why I thought it was quite good, with your little suitcase, what you just said. I have another image for the consultants. Consultants aren't a bit smarter than the people in the companies, I completely agree with you there. But they are, in a way, a bit of a lubricant for the modernization of the economy, because they take in the experiences, see, okay, how did it work, and pass that experience on. And somehow, it propagates itself. And that's how I saw it in the metaphor of the lubricant of the economy. And you've rightly mentioned that you can plow through all of that, get the different perspectives, and then also use profiling values for individuals and for teams. But what I see as a classic case now is, we might have worked out corporate values, taken something, like you just said, SDG and so on. But how do we now bring these values into everyday life? I know so many companies, and sometimes I say it as a joke, that hang their values so high that they can comfortably walk right under them. So the point is really to say, how do I get the values to be lived in everyday life? And what is, so to speak, your approach? What typical challenges do you face there?
I'd like to, Aki, if you allow me, jump right in there.
Please, go ahead.
The marketing we talked about is both internal and external. And we have, for example, or with every client, we think about how we can connect the two. I'll tell you the ideal scenario, Uli. If we find a claim, right, that we can use. There are various possibilities that appear under a logo, where a company basically says, look, this is how we define ourselves. If, in the best case, and this is what we strive for, I can use it both externally for the customer and internally. And that's what I derive it from. We have a family business, for example. I asked beforehand, are we allowed to mention it? Yes, we're allowed to mention the claim. There it says, because every customer can read it, clear, strong, and Nordic.
I see.
And now to get into it, what exactly is clear? The customer says, to explain that to the customer. What exactly is clear with you guys? Well, those are our offers. Those are our pricing structures. That's the transparency of our services that we want to provide for you. What is strong? Well, that's our project management, with which we actually implement them. And now comes the Nordic part, that's the heart. You'll find your three things again: heart, hand, and mind. And there you see that profiling values is also integrated holistically into the communication again. And we derive it from that. Then we go through the companies and conduct interviews and first of all ask everyone. And in the family business there are 450 people. We don't ask all 450, but about 200 representatively. And if at all possible, everyone, because we want to know. What do they think of when they hear these terms? That's already a point of difference. And we want to get the people on board. It's a bit of work, but we're interested. What do you understand by clear, strong, and Nordic? And from that, we filter things out in the end. And then it also always depends on what connotation we see it in. But from that, we then derive values and explain how we want to specifically implement these things. And then workshops are held, where very detailed discussions take place in the departments about how we can integrate that into everyday life. And then suddenly you're talking about management tools. Why does it make sense for us to do it this way or that way? That's clear. If we don't do it like that, it's not Nordic, friends. And so, through communication, which can simultaneously be used for marketing, we can actually enter into a dialogue with the individual employee, with the boss, with everyone together, and on the other hand, also with the customer. And that's where it becomes totally concrete for people.
So that means you go in and always, in the individual departments, when you're really talking about the doing, you have a kind of litmus test with you. Right, then you can say, wait a minute, we have clear, strong, and Nordic here, staying with the example, and that's what we want to achieve. And if it's just vaguely floating around, then the alarm bells can already start ringing. Or if, for example, there's no clarity in service and people aren't being welcomed in a Nordic way with heart, then something's wrong, right? So you achieve a bit of control for consistency, could you put it that way?
It's actually when you hear the story, Uli, that you're told by a subordinate to someone above them. So recently I had this situation where a site manager comes up to the project manager and says to him, look, that was really everything, but it wasn't clear and it wasn't strong either. And it wasn't Nordic either. Then I say to myself, if I hear something like that, if something like that reaches my ears, then it's worked.
Then it worked, yeah, great.
And that's where you have to get to. You have to get there with meticulousness, because reshaping something like that isn't exactly easy. Because we always distinguish between problems and conflicts, right? Problems are between man and machine. We're often brilliant at that in this country. We can solve problems, but when it comes to resolving conflicts, we're not always that good at it, right? But those are exactly what cost much more money because they don't float on the surface.
Yeah. And I can actually recommend Reinhard Sprenger and his book, The Magic of Conflict. Yeah, and he says it very nicely. We shouldn't always say that we have to resolve conflicts, but often the conflict itself is the solution. So we obviously need them too,
Yes.
And if you look at it that way, I think the idea of the blueprint or litmus test is great. And specifically when people approach managers and say, look, what you're saying right now doesn't actually pass the values test. And it's so simple, I'd say, that no one can really avoid it, so then we're on the right track. But now I'll take the next step, too. Crisis, right. That's what they always say. Crisis here, crisis there, stagnation, here, the economy, we don't need to talk about it. How can values specifically play a stabilizing role for companies during times of crisis? That's something you surely encounter quite often. And you're probably often called in because there's a lot of red ink on the books. And that's a crisis. And then you have to step in. Can we elaborate a bit more on how values can play a stabilizing role for companies, especially in times of crisis?
Well, I'd say, Ali, if I can put it this way from our perspective, values serve as guardrails for decision-making in these uncertain times, in these times of crisis. And, once I have those values and I stick to transparency, fairness, and sustainability, right, and I keep bringing people along, just like we did in the interviews earlier, then we can build trust and, together with a strong strategy, look ahead with customers, the market, and employees. And consistently, build and maintain this resilience and stability during times of crisis.
MHM.
Yeah, you once had that ball example regarding crises. I don't know if maybe at this point you could.
Sure, absolutely. I love imagery. I love metaphors. Go for it, Sebastian.
Ulrich, we always use this image because we asked ourselves, how do we make companies more resilient? There are stability criteria in mathematics called trajectories. And if you imagine a tennis ball and you whack it with a racket, it's flat as a pancake just before it leaves the racket.
MHM.
We equate that to an external impact that a company has experienced. Like, a major customer pulls out because they went bankrupt, a classic scenario. Or some decisions from a customer's new boss, right? Or a key employee suddenly leaves. Then you wonder, I'd really like the ball to fly for a moment, but if it needs to be ready for the next hit, it should return to its original shape. And we look for this trajectory in companies. That means the levers that are responsible for making value creation work, people very often don't deal with those. A classic example is, you have an appointment, you're sitting at your desk, and many people then start by tidying up their desk or doing something else. Displacement activity, right? And we have a world that is currently characterized by, it was named many years ago. But the manifestation is becoming sharper and sharper. It's called VUCA. VUCA stands for volatility. That's the big problem with sales. It stands for uncertainty. In the past, you didn't know what tomorrow would bring either, but it was more predictable. Today, Mr. Trump could do heaven knows what tomorrow. That's a good example. Or Mr. Putin, we just don't know. It's becoming more and more uncertain. We have high complexity. We always explain complexity like this. Today you put in A and you get out B. Tomorrow you put in A again, but you get out C and you have no idea why. Wicked tongues claim that you often have this in relationships too. I did exactly the same thing as yesterday, but today the person was angry. And we have ambiguity. Ambiguity is a real challenge for forming an opinion because if I sit down at the internet now, Uli, and want to dig out 20 opinions that humans aren't responsible for the climate catastrophe, I'll find them. If I want to find 20 that describe the exact opposite, I'll find those too. And in the age of this abundance of information, forming an opinion, and especially a well-founded one of your own, has become increasingly difficult. That's VUCA. That's the VUCA world. And if I now, let's stick with clear, strong, Nordic. Keep focusing on all 4 problems or challenges that we have there. So, if that's the case, then it really holds up, just like Aki says, because it truly stood for those important values, and that means I can, in turn, make the right decision.
That's good. I'd like to jump in there, Sebastian, because that's then also a kind of compass with which we can steer through a crisis. And I also really like the thing with the ball again, the trajectories. I'll take that with me. But I'm going to go one step further now. So not just the compass that steers through it, but we had the crisis before. And you also introduced the term insurance in your preliminary work, right? And I want to draw a parallel to Hartmann, who, by the way, really mentioned this in his seminars that he gave back then, value seminars. He also touched on this insurance principle and explained it exactly. It's actually the exact opposite of the lottery principle. In the insurance principle, we pool our resources so that when a loss occurs, we have enough for that person. A lottery is exactly the opposite. We pool our resources so that one person somehow becomes filthy rich, right? But the point here is that in the insurance principle, we say that if we pay into these values, if we act clear, strong, and Nordic, if there's, so to speak, that's the premium we pay in, right? That's what we don't want back, either. Instead, we put it in not just monthly, but daily, and that's the insurance for us when the crisis hits, that we're positioned differently than if we didn't do it. Is that too far fetched?
Well, I would. No, that's, that is a brilliant thought that really refines what we once talked about regarding our way of thinking. I'll add one point to that and immediately bridge the gap, because it really is brilliant. We once said to ourselves, regarding uncertainty, right, that's a fundamental economic problem. Uncertainty. Nobody knows what tomorrow brings. People have always been interested. They've consulted horoscopes, seers, what have you, so that they somehow know what tomorrow brings. An entire industry has taken on this problem. And whether it's pension insurance, accident insurance, home insurance, whatever, they all provide you with security in the future out of today's uncertainty. Sometimes at a specific point in time, the date is precisely named. Let's take retirement.
MHM.
So we said to ourselves, you know what? Let's go to the insurance company, Uli, and say we'd like to insure our corporate profits so we're absolutely sure they don't go south.
MHM.
Then they said, well, that's going to be difficult because the law of large numbers will. Probably, something will, that won't work. Well, why not? Well, obviously, because the premium will be higher than the profit you're insuring, and so it doesn't work. In some cases, by the way, you can actually do that for a few months. With certain types of financing, we've seen it all, but as a rule, it doesn't work, of course. And now the question is, Uli, what's the equivalent in companies for being able to insure these profits?
Yeah.
It's a strategy.
Yes.
It's a strategy that explains to you on a factual level what we want to do. And as for how we want to do it, that's where the values help, if your tennis ball ever goes flat. That with these values, you actually stick to what you need, even in a crisis. Actually stick to it. Because that's often not done. In times of crisis, people sometimes don't trust their tools, their leadership methods, and their strategies. Yeah. Because they usually follow a co-strategy or a co-evolution instead of their own strategy. And that's where two things come together. The factual level into the future for the deadline. That's how we want to build a strategy. On the factual level. And now comes the behavioral level. And with the values, we build resilience for the crisis, the one that gets in our way while implementing this strategy for the future. That's exactly how it works.
So that means we're strengthening behavior. And now, turning back to Axel, because I want to know, what role does leadership play in this context? Right, here, when we have a value-based corporate strategy. Because it's the leaders too, you emphasize the uncertainty. Or when things get tough, when you're in over your head, it's often like, wow, I really need to be able to rely on the leadership team, because if there are leaks, so to speak, then we've suddenly got a flooded compartment in the boat. And so Axel, over to you, what role does leadership play in the context of a value-based corporate strategy? Yeah, how can leaders really motivate their teams to live those values?
Well, by, as the saying goes, leading by example. Yes, leaders provide security by sticking to these values, consistently modeling them. And not just having them hanging on a wall in a nice picture for show, but taking them seriously and also making their decisions every day, whether in a crisis or just in everyday life, based on these values, incorporating the principle, so to speak. And that creates security, that creates clarity for the employees. And there's also the issue of responsibility. Who stands where and who has what responsibility for the tasks? And how can we manage together, in this crisis, to look ahead with our values and move into the future? And through that, to also make visible what we've achieved together and what we want to achieve. So, bringing successes to the table accordingly and showing, look, because of our values, because of what we decided here, we are where we are right now.
I think that's great, and it also shows us, folks, that we have to keep it simple and clear. Yes, just like we say at profiling values, as you mentioned, heart, hand, brain, we've just carried through our nice example from your client here with clear, strong, and Nordic. And then it can work because we humans can remember three things. Yeah, we can even remember that in any life situation. But if I have a set of values of 7 or 8 or whatever, maybe even 6 or 7 ambivalent pairs or whatever, which happens often, then I'm just lost. So, the practical everyday use here is also the reduction, the condensation to the absolute essentials. And then, of course, in every area, heart, hand, and brain, we have to approach it with human values accordingly and have a sensible way of interacting. But that's how it all comes together, I think. You've shown impressively how we can go in with values, even into these strategic topics, reach people, really empower them, and ultimately secure companies. So, I found our Tour de Horizon that we did here highly fascinating. And we also stuck to the time boxing. So, everyone, once again, a very big thank you for contributing to this great episode. It was really great. Thanks and see you very soon.
Thanks a lot, Uli.
See you soon.
Bye.
All right. Ciao, ciao. Bye.